The folder is thin. That's the first thing I notice. 22 pages, cream-colored, smelling faintly of a law office somewhere downtown. The kind of place where the carpet is burgundy and the receptionist asks you twice if you're sure you want to proceed. My half-brother Declan is sitting across a mahogany table from me, and his jaw is doing something I can only describe as trying to leave his face. My stepmother Renata has both hands pressed flat on the table, as if she's keeping it from rising. And at the center of that table, in a clear plastic sleeve, is a birthday card. A child's birthday card, orange balloons on the front, the kind you buy at a pharmacy for $2. It's addressed to me. The postmark is March 1994. I was 11 years old. I had never seen it before in my life. I'm Marisal. And if you're new here, welcome to Calm Revenge Tales, where we tell the stories of people who were written off, quietly, and then waited. Subscribe now because this one takes 20 years to land, and you're going to want to be there when it does. I'm a structural engineer. I design load-bearing systems for mid-rise buildings. The kind of invisible work where if I do my job correctly, nothing dramatic ever happens. That suits me. I've been at the same firm in Portland for 11 years, and I own a 2-bedroom house on a corner lot on Northeast Killingsworth where the roses come back every April without being asked. I bought it without a cosigner. I furnished it slowly, one room at a time, starting with the kitchen because the kitchen is where I think. None of that was handed to me. I want to be precise about that. Not to perform suffering, but because it matters to the story. The person I need you to understand is my grandmother, Celia. My father's mother. She was 73 when this story begins, 4'11", with the posture of a woman who had once been told to stand straighter, and never forgave the person who said it. She lived in a small house in Salinas, California, with a fig tree in the backyard that she had planted herself in 1971. She made a soup called caldo de residential every Sunday, short rib, potato, chayote, corn on the cob cut into thick rounds, and she ate it at the same table for 50 years. My father's second family treated Celia the way people treat furniture in a room they're renovating. Polite tolerance until the demolition begins. I drove down to Salinas every other month. I took Fridays off and arrived before dark, and we ate her soup and watched the news, and she asked me questions about my bridges. She called them my bridges even though I don't build bridges. I never corrected her. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in October. My father, Rodrigo, though most people called him Rod, which he preferred, was turning 60. His wife Renata had organized a dinner at their home in Fresno. 40 guests, a caterer, a jazz quartet. I know this because Declan called to relay the details with the particular energy of someone who has been told to make the call, but does not personally endorse it. Dad wants you there, he said. There was a pause where the rest of the sentence should have been. The condition was not stated outright. It was stated sideways, which is worse. Renata had mentioned, Declan was just passing it along, that Abuela Celia's attendance might make some of the other guests uncomfortable, given the, and here he used a word I won't repeat, given the family history. So perhaps I might come alone. Just me. Leave Celia at home. I want you to hold that for a moment. They were asking me to come celebrate a man who put me out of his house at age 11, on the condition that I leave behind the only person who had taken me in. Celia, when I told her, set down her coffee cup. She looked at the window above the kitchen sink, the one that faced the fig tree, and she said, "Go. You should know your father's house." She said it the way you say something that has a second meaning you're not ready to explain yet. I went. I told myself it was for information. Structurally speaking, you cannot assess a load without first understanding the foundation. And I needed to understand what I was built on, or built against. I brought her a container of the caldo frozen, labeled in her handwriting. She had insisted on doing it herself, and I left it in her freezer for when I got back. I should have noticed the way she held my hand at the door. A half-second longer than usual. The dinner was on a Saturday in November. 61 degrees in Fresno, which means the women wore their best light jackets and the men drank scotch on the patio and called it brisk. Rodrigo looked well. That was the disorienting thing. He looked healthy and prosperous and utterly untroubled. He had the tan of a man who golfs. He hugged me with the one-armed hug of someone who has practiced sincerity without acquiring it, and he said, "Marisol, good, you made it." As if I had navigated traffic rather than 20 years. I sat at the table assigned to me, which was not the family table. I noted that. I ate my food. The caterer had done salmon with a caper beurre blanc that was genuinely very good, and I listened and I observed. It was Renata who started it. She did it at the dessert course, which meant 40 people had lowered their guard. She stood to give a toast, and the toast was about legacy and family, and what Rodrigo had built, and she swept her arm around the table and named his children, Declan, Fernanda, little Mateo, and she looked directly at me when she finished the list. She looked directly at me. And stopped. 40 people heard the silence where my name was. I set down my fork. One of Declan's friends, a man I'd never met, shifted in his seat. He looked at his wife. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. Renata sat down. Rodrigo said nothing. He was looking at his wine glass. His hands went very still. I stood up. I said, "Thank you for having me. I think I should go." Renata said, "That's probably for the best." She said it quietly enough that only the 8 people nearest her could hear. But the 8 people nearest her heard it. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I said, and I want to be clear, I said this to the table, not to her. The salmon was excellent. Then I walked out. That was not the revenge. I want to be clear about that too. That was just Tuesday. The revenge takes longer and it is quieter, and it involves a birthday card and a man named Arthur Finch, estate attorney. When I got back to Salinas, Celia was not at the door. She was in the hospital. She had been there since Friday. A fall, her neighbor Esperanza had called my cell, but I'd had it on silent for the dinner, and the fall had found something the doctors had been looking for without looking for it. A fracture. And underneath the fracture, something older and slower and already well underway. I moved in. Not metaphorically. I called my firm on Monday morning and negotiated a remote arrangement for the next 6 months. I drove back to Portland, packed 2 suitcases and my drafting equipment, arranged for a colleague to water the roses, and drove back to Salinas by Thursday. The fig tree needed pruning. I learned to prune fig trees. This is the kind of thing I mean when I say I just solve. The financials were not comfortable. My mortgage in Portland ran $1,847 a month. Celia's medical costs, after Medicare, were averaging $340 a month in copays and medications. I had savings. The savings became less savings. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I was resentful, but because I am an engineer and engineers track loads. Rodrigo called once in January. He said he was sorry to hear about Mama, and that if there was anything, and the sentence ended there, on anything, like a bridge that stops over water. I said I had it handled. He said good. We hung up. Renata emailed in February with the subject line checking in. The email said that Celia might be more comfortable in a care facility, and that they had done some research, and that a place in Fresno, near the family, she wrote, as if I were not family, had an opening. I did not respond to that email. This is when the card appeared. Celia was having a good week. She had what the hospice nurse called good weeks and bad weeks. And on the good ones she was almost herself, sharp and funny and demanding in the way of someone who knows exactly what they want. And she asked me to bring a particular box down from the closet shelf. Cardboard, the size of a shoebox, wrapped in paper that had once been green. She held it in her lap for a while. She didn't open it. She said, "When I'm gone you take this to Arthur Finch. He knows what to do." I wrote down the name. Arthur Finch. I put the paper in my wallet. I didn't ask questions because I had learned, over many months in that house, that Celia gave information on her own schedule. The box sat on her nightstand for the rest of that winter. I dusted around it. I never touched it. On a Thursday in March, one of the bad weeks, she asked me to make the caldo. Just me, with her watching from the doorway of the kitchen, directing every step in a voice that had gotten quieter, but not less precise. 2 pounds of short rib, browned first. The water cold at the start, not hot. The chayote goes in last or it disappears. She watched me the way you watch someone learning something you need them to know. That was the last meal we cooked together. She died on a Tuesday in April. The fig tree had just come back. If you're still here, and if this story has taken something from you already, I understand. Please subscribe. Because what I found in that box changes everything. And I need you there when it opens. The story doesn't end with her. She made sure of that. Arthur Finch had an office on Main Street in Salinas, above a tax preparation service. He was 70 years old, with a gray mustache and the reading glasses of a man who had worn reading glasses for 40 years. He had known Celia since 1987. He said this in a way that meant, I knew her before any of this. He had already sent letters. He had sent them to Rodrigo and to Declan and to Fernanda and to Renata. The letters contained a date and an address and a time. A meeting, to discuss the estate, and a sentence very precisely worded, that said attendance was strongly advised. They all came. I arrived first. I sat at the conference table and Arthur Finch placed the box, Celia's green paper box, at the center of it and said we would begin when everyone was present. Rodrigo arrived with Renata. Declan arrived alone. Fernanda came with her husband, a quiet man named Gary who looked like he already wanted to be somewhere else. Arthur opened the box. He began with the property. The house in Salinas, assessed at $614,000, which made Renata's chin lift exactly a quarter inch, had been in Celia's name alone since 1989. She had refinanced it that year, removed Rodrigo's name from the deed, and she had done so legally, with counsel, and with full documentation. Arthur laid the paperwork on the table. Then he opened the second envelope. The will was 11 pages. It had been updated, most recently in November of last year, 2 weeks after I moved in. The primary beneficiary of the Salinas property, and of a savings account containing $83,400, was me. Declan said, "That's not," and stopped. Rodrigo's face did something I didn't have a name for at the time. A kind of slow draining. Like something structural had given way. Renata stood up. She said the will was clearly the result of undue influence, that I had moved in specifically to manipulate a dying woman, that this would be challenged, that she had witnesses to my behavior, that. Arthur let her finish. He was very patient about it. Then he said, "Mrs. Vasquez, I drafted this will. The previous version, identical in its beneficiary designation, was drafted in 2003. Marisol was 20 years old at the time and living in Portland. She had no knowledge of its contents. If you'd like to see the documentation." And he slid a folder across the table with the practiced calm of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. Fernanda's husband Gary looked at the table. Then Arthur opened the last envelope. He removed the birthday card. Orange balloons. $2 at a pharmacy. Postmarked March 1994. He said. Celia mailed this card to Marisol on her 11th birthday. It was returned to sender. Unclaimed. The forwarding address had been removed. He looked at Rodrigo. She kept it for 30 years. The room was quiet. I looked at the card in its plastic sleeve. On the inside. Arthur had opened it to the page. Celia had written, "Mija, the house will always be yours. Come home whenever the door is open." She had written that when I was 11. When my father had sent me away and I had ended up, by a chain of phone calls I still don't fully understand, on a bus to Salinas with $40 and a backpack. She had written it knowing, I understand now, that Rodrigo had intercepted every letter she tried to send that year. She had kept every returned envelope. The box held 14 of them. Rodrigo said. I didn't know she kept them. It was the truest thing I had ever heard him say. His hands, resting on the table, were very still. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about what I could say. There was a sentence available to me that would have made him smaller in front of his family, in front of Arthur, in front of all of it. I knew exactly what the sentence was. I chose not to say it. I said. She wanted you here when we opened it. That was her choice. That was Celia's last line, echoed back. You should know your father's house. She had wanted him to see what she had built around the damage he had done. The challenge to the will was filed within 2 weeks. It was dismissed within 6. Arthur had been preparing for it since 2003. The documentation was, as he put it, thorough. The house transferred to me in August. I flew down, signed the papers at Arthur's office, shook his hand, and asked if he wanted to stay for coffee. He said yes. We sat in Celia's kitchen, and I made coffee the way she had taught me. Stovetop, not a drip machine, with a piece of piloncillo dissolved in the bottom of the cup. He told me she had spoken about me every year. Every single year for 30 years, she had come in to update or confirm her documents, and she had mentioned me, what I was studying, where I was working, the house I had bought without a cosigner. He said she had the word Bridges written in the margin of her notes, underlined, with a small star. I paid the property taxes for the year, $7,243. I arranged for a local property management firm to handle the rental, until I could decide what to do with it. I planted 2 new fig trees from cuttings. A neighbor who had known Celia for decades showed me how, which branch to take, which angle to cut, how deep to bury it, and how long to wait before expecting anything. Rodrigo never called. I had not expected him to. Declan sent a text 4 months later that said, "I hope you're okay." I read it twice. I sent back, "I am." That was true. Fernanda emailed at Christmas. A short note, nothing that required anything from me. I wrote back a paragraph. Gary, her husband, had apparently said something to her after the meeting. She didn't say what, and she had started to ask questions she had not previously thought to ask. I don't know where that leads. I left the door at a certain width, and said she could write again if she wanted to. That was the mercy I offered. It was not taken fully, but it was taken a little, and I don't regret extending it. I go back to Salinas every other month. I take Fridays off. I park in front of the house on Maple and I walk the property and I check the fig trees. The original, which came back again this April without being asked, and the 2 new ones, which are smaller but holding. Last month I made the caldo. Alone in Celia's kitchen, with the window open above the sink. Short rib browned first. Water cold at the start. The chayote goes in last. I ate at her table. The inheritance wasn't the house. The house is just a house. The inheritance was knowing the water starts cold. That the chayote goes in last. That you write the card even when you don't know if it will arrive, and you keep the returned envelope because someday someone will need to know you tried. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something in that kitchen, at that table, in that room with the orange balloon card, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it. Leave a comment about the person who wrote you the letter that never arrived, or the one who kept the door open when no one was watching. Subscribe if you haven't. And today, not tomorrow, call the person who showed up for you when they didn't have to. Tell them you remember. I'll see you in the next one.